Uh, Lovely. So a very warm welcome, everyone, to tonight's family talks commemorating the 85th anniversary of the Kindertransports from Cologne. My name is Berta Klarzig. I work as a researcher for Jewish history at the Documentation Centre on National Socialism here in Cologne. And I'm going to chair the meeting tonight. And I'm delighted to welcome two guests on the panel tonight. Kurt Marx, who was born in Cologne in 1925, and he was saved aboard a Kindertransport leaving Cologne for London in January 1939 as a 13-year-old boy. And we also have a son on the panel as a guest, Michael Marx, and they're both joining us from London, I think. And we also wanted to welcome a third panelist to tonight's discussion, the daughter of Eva Meyer, who, as it happens, was born in the same year as Kurt and also in the same borough of Köln, in Köln-Lindenthal, although she then later grew up in a different borough. And her daughter wanted to join us. Sadly, Eva Meyer cannot be here with us tonight. She passed away at the end of last year. But her daughter wanted to join the panel and talk about her mother's story, and unfortunately she couldn't make it. But we did record an interview with Eva Meyer a couple of years ago, and we will show you a few clippings from that interview in which Eva Meyer talks about her experiences on the Kindertransport. And so, to get her perspective, we will present some short clippings from that interview. So before we start, I'd like to make some technical remarks. As we said in the email in which we sent you the link to the event, we are going to record this discussion, and then we'd like to put it on YouTube. So if you do not want to appear on the screen in the video, please turn off your camera, and you may change your full name to initials, not to be recognizable in the recording. And also we muted you, but there will be the chance for the audience to ask questions at the end of the discussion. So just make sure, if you want to contribute, that you unmute yourself before saying anything. So yeah, I think most of you are certainly very familiar with the history of the Kindertransports. But for those in the audience who might not be, I'm just going to say a few words as an introduction about the Kindertransports in general and the history of the Kindertransports leaving from Cologne. So you certainly know that following the Novemberpogrom in 1938, the Belgian and the British government both granted Jewish children under the age of 18 from Germany and Austria entry to Belgium or the UK respectively. And thus they saved around about 10,000 young people from the Nazi persecution, and then that way from the Shoah. But as only underage children were accepted, these so-called Kinder, who were anything between the age from 2 to 17, they had to go unaccompanied. So they had to leave their parents behind. In many cases, they also had to leave their siblings behind. And many of them, of course, hoped that they would be reunited with their families in the UK or some other country later on. But in fact, most of them, they would never see anyone from their family again, because of those staying behind, the parents, in many cases, they did not have the chance to leave anymore. Then they were murdered in the Shoah later on. And these children who went to the UK, some of them, they came into foster families, but many others, they stayed in hostels together with the group they had come with on the transport from Germany or Austria. And in Cologne, the headmaster of the Jewish grammar school, the Jawne at that time, Dr. Erich Klibansky, he took that opportunity of the Kindertransports and organized several transports for his students to the UK. And thus he managed to save round about 130 of his students from the school on 4 transports altogether. So he managed to organize 4 transports, which went to London and Liverpool or Manchester and Brighton. And the students from the school, they then stayed in hostels in these cities and attended British schools. And Erich Klibansky, he accompanied several of these transports to England, but he always returned home afterwards to organize more transports to be able to save more of his students. And when the Kindertransport scheme was stopped by the British government at the beginning of World War II, he was stuck in Germany and he had no chance to escape anymore with his family. And so he was among thousands of Jewish people from Cologne who were deported to Minsk in July 1942. And everyone from that transport was murdered right away upon arrival at a nearby extinction camp in Mali Trostenetz. So none of the deportees survived that transport, and Erich Klibansky, along with his wife and his children, was murdered as well. So to commemorate the 85th anniversary of the Kindertransports and Erich Klibansky's courageous commitment and encouragement, in tonight's panel discussion, we will present the stories of 2 of the Kinder, Kurt Marx, who I already introduced to the panel, and Eva Meyer, and their families. And their stories, they stand, of course, exemplary for the roundabout 130 children who were saved by the commitment of Erich Klibansky. But they also stand exemplary for the losses these children suffered as well, and for their experiences and the impact their story had and still has on the families up until today. Well, as I said, Kurt left Cologne for London aboard the very first transport organized by the school's headmaster, which left Cologne in January 1939. And he will give us an account of his experiences later on. And Eva Meyer, the second child who we would like to present tonight, she left a month later on the second Kindertransport in February 1939. And I would now like to start by playing a few clippings from that interview we did with her in 2021, in which she talks about her experiences and gives her account of the events. I think, Charlotte, I think you have to give me permission to share the screen.
Did it work? Oh, you did.
Yeah, I just made myself post again to make it work. Sorry. So now it should work.
From there, I went to a Jewish high school in Jawne, and eventually, when things got bad, the principal of the high school arranged for my class, as well as some other classes, to go to England, where a committee of Jewish people from the synagogue there said they would look after us, which they did. So in 1939, I'm not sure it was September before that, it might be before that, my classmates and I went to England. My oldest brother was already studying in England to be an engineer. He just had to finish in Madrid, I think. So he was there already. I went with my school class, all my friends, and we stayed in a very big house in Willesden, London. And when the war, my next brother soon came, and he went to Liverpool, where some people looked after his class. So then the war started, and the English school evacuated us down to Northampton in the Midlands, in England there. And there, the Jewish committee still looked after us somewhat, but it's an English school that distributed us to people until our hostel was ready. Our place was ready for us. So we stayed with some very nice English people. Everybody treated us very well. We were told not to speak any German, which is perfectly natural since the war was on then. And from there, I'm trying to think what we did there. Oh yeah, the people we stayed with had 5 children, so they lived in a council house, so very close quarters. So my girlfriend and I used to suffer from sore throats a lot. So our teacher, Mr. Clitheroe, very nice man, took us to the local doctor who just loved to convert German. He had studied it or whatever. So he was very friendly, and we went to see him frequently. And eventually our English teacher asked if he and his wife could take us for a while, because the situation we were living in was not great. Too many people in one house. So they said they would take us temporarily. They had no children. So my girlfriend Susie Speyer-Holstein and myself went to live with Dr. and Mrs. Stone, who were very, very kind to us. They had a dog, which I was afraid to start with. I got used to it. And we stayed there. And it was supposed to be temporary, but the teacher, who knew that we were very well looked after there, kept saying, well, we're still looking. And we stayed there for 8 years. So in the meantime, we were 14 or 15, almost 15, and finished with school. Nobody was going to pay for us to go to high school. That time you had to pay for that. And so my girlfriend became an assistant to the doctor in his practice, made up prescriptions and stuff like that. You couldn't do it now because obviously she wasn't qualified. And I went to work for a friend of theirs, a dentist, and I learned how to be a dental technician.
Okay, so that was the first part, and we're just going to go a bit forward, where she goes into a bit more detail about her experiences on the transport.
French as well. The French teacher was absolutely awful. But that's beside the point. But when I went to England, I went with most of my school friends, the ones who parents allowed them to go. And when we got to England, there was a group of Jewish people who sponsored us and looked after us. Like until we were settled, there was a big house for us, a hostel that we all went to live in. But before that, we stayed with different families. English, we got a better at English, of course, because English wasn't our first language. Now I can hardly speak German, but that's beside the point. That's all right. So England was very kind to us. We had to work, and we weren't pampered or anything, because if you're a child, especially myself, I adjust to what I find, So, and the rest of the girls did too. Some came with their parents to England. Some went to America right away because somebody sponsored them. But a whole lot of us stayed in England. A lot of them stayed in England. I didn't stay in England because my brother was in Canada. He shipped there as an alien, right? So I wanted to join him, and I did. So once I came here, sort of had different jobs, nothing specific.
And then the third segment later on.
I don't really remember, but we have a very poignant picture of somebody. My second brother was an artist first, so he drew a picture of my mother waving goodbye to a train that presumably had some of us on it, goodbye, a last goodbye, which is a very good picture. I have it here. My daughter has. Oh, you have it? Yeah. But, I probably was, 12, 13-year-old at that time wasn't the same as now. We didn't know. We lived in our own little world. Didn't know what's going on in the rest of the world as far as we were. It didn't affect you directly or your family cared, which is probably my nature to start with, but that served me well. So, no, it didn't affect me that much. I mean, then my oldest brother was gone, but we just figured he'd gone to study, in England, which is what happened.
Okay, so that hopefully gave you a little impression of her experiences, of how she experienced the Kindertransports and the impact it had on her life later on. So what happened to her family was, she does mention her brothers in the interview, who both managed to leave Germany as well, went to the UK. Well, I think both of them did. And her older brother was then interned as an enemy alien in the UK and shipped to Canada. So that's why she then followed him to Canada a couple of years after she'd come to the UK, and then went to live with him. And later on, he went to Israel and then became a journalist there. So he had quite a successful professional career in his later life. While she does mention that her studies were interrupted by the Kindertransport, that she was not able to get higher education as she had intended when starting her schooling here in Germany. So she, in a way, she could never quite live up to the career she had probably imagined as a young girl, not being able to do her A-levels, not being able to study. Her parents could not follow their children to the UK. Her mother, she was Dutch by birth. So what they did was they fled to the Netherlands in the late 30s, 39, hoping that they would escape the Nazi persecution there. But as you all know, the Netherlands were then during World War II invaded by Germany. So her parents got stuck in the Netherlands. They were interned at the Dutch camp of Westerbork, and then from there deported to Auschwitz, where they both were murdered. So she was one of the many Kinder who would at least not see her parents ever again after leaving aboard that Kindertransport. So that's a very short context of her life story. Before, I would now like to continue with your story, Kurt. And I prepared some photographs. You gave us quite a lot of photographs from your life, your family, a couple of years back. I mean, I should mention that we have been in touch for many years. You also knew my predecessor, Barbara Becker-Jacqui, quite well. So you have been in contact with the Documentation Center and other institutions like the Jawne Memorial for many years now. And we have quite a few documents and photographs of you in our collections. And I picked a couple of photographs, depicting parts of your life, of your story, which I would now like to discuss with you. So I'm going to share the screen again to present. So this is the first picture. Can you tell us a little bit about where it was taken, whom it showed?
Well, that's me when I was about 4 years old, I suppose, 3, 4, 5, maybe, no, not 5, younger. That was in Cologne, when we lived in the Petersbergstraße. Yes, that was. In fact, I've been there. The building is still standing, and it looks as I remembered it. It's quite interesting. Whereas in England, all the railings outside buildings that were metal were cut down and used. The railings outside that house are still the same that I remember from when I was a small boy, because I've got a photograph of myself in front of the building, and the rails, the metal railings at the front of the building are exactly the same now as they were then. Quite interesting. So there was obviously no shortage of metal in Germany at that time, because they did not in England, they cut them all down.
Okay. And so what was your life like? I mean, who were your friends? What did you do in your free time?
But at that time,
Well,
I was a
a bit
little
older.
I was a little boy, as you can see. But I was my uncle and aunt, or great uncle, great aunt, lived around the corner, and their daughter, called her my cousin, she was teaching children how to do gymnastics. So I used to go around there and had gymnastic lessons with other children in there. At that time, she had a kind of a studio where it's now a garage. And when we were there some time ago, Larissa, I believe, actually went into the house to talk to the man who lives there now. So it was quite interesting to see that visually nothing has changed. It's as I remembered it when I went there.
And who were your friends? I mean, did you have friends in the neighborhood? Would you
Well,
roam around?
I don't know. I was a little boy. I'm sure that I must have had friends, because I really can't remember what I did as a 4-year-old.
Yeah, probably a bit early. I mean, you stayed until you were 13, so yeah, probably the years later.
Yes. Yes, well, I came here, as you know, with the Kindertransport. I went to the Jawne, which was my luck, I suppose. If I hadn't gone to the Jawne, I would have finished up where Klibansky finished, and my parents, in a place called Mali Trostenets near Minsk, where they were murdered in 1942.
So let's talk a little bit more about your family and your parents. We have this photograph here which shows your mother in the middle.
Yes, this photograph was taken at my bar mitzvah. Today, in this country, certainly, when a boy is bar mitzvah, the party is like a big wedding. In those days, it was a family gathering. They all came to our apartment, all the uncles and aunts and cousins and what have you. And I remember my aunt, she was the wife of Max Marx. He was a butcher. He had a high-class butcher shop in the Marselstein near the Neumarkt. And they had a lady a cook, who did the cooking for them. And she came to our apartment and she prepared the meal. And so that's why everybody is busy. Well, it was, as I said, it was not a big party. It was just a family affair.
So can you tell us when your bar mitzvah was? Which year?
No, I was bar mitzvah in 1938.
Yeah, so that was
in the Rohnstraße, which was, in fact, the synagogue today looks exactly as it looked in those days. It was rebuilt the same way as it had been. So when I went some years ago, there's no question. That's why I was bar mitzvah.
Yeah. So, but
And
you, I mean, that was already under the Nazi persecution, and you must have been one of the very last boys to be bar mitzvahed at the
I was bar
synagogue.
mitzvah in September,
Yeah.
2 months before Kristallnacht,
Mm.
on the 10th of September, 1938.
Yeah. So these pictures were taken more or less on the eve of you leaving Cologne. You didn't have that many more
No,
weeks here.
this was, as I said, this was September 38. Well, I left in January, we left in January, but
Mm.
Kristallnacht was 2 months later.
Yeah. And then we've got another photograph from the same occasion showing your father here.
This was my father and my great aunt. This lady was my grandmother's sister.
Mm.
Yes. They lived, as I said, they lived around the corner on the Klettenberg Gürtel. So, as one can see, my father at that time, he looked already, he wasn't the effects of the time you can see on his face. His life was not very easy anymore.
No, I can definitely see that there pressure there. You were under at that time already. But I think you got quite a special present for your bar mitzvah suitcase. You told us the story before that you would be given a suitcase which accompanied you for quite a long time in your life, didn't it?
Yes, yes. Yes, in those days, the presents that I had was, as I said, there was one aunt. In fact, she's on one of the photographs. Not this picture. The lady on the right. They used to live in Hamborn, and they had a business with leather goods. And I had a very nice small suitcase from them, which accompanied me all the time. And somehow it got lost over the years. But this was my mother's sister. And yes, it's a long time ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but then the suitcase came with you on the Kindertransport to
Yes,
London.
I took it to London. Then we were evacuated from London to Bedford. Of course, when we were evacuated, just before war broke out, we all had a rucksack with our essential needs, what they thought we would need: shirts, trousers, underwear. And at some stage, we got not all of our possessions, but most of our possessions were sent on afterwards to where we lived. It was quite, I think, the experience of being evacuated from London into a strange new environment was more traumatic than our actual trip to London. Because coming to London with all our school friends, it was like a school outing. We were all looking forward to going to London, because at that time, as far as we were concerned, our parents were going to emigrate to America, and we would join them. And of course, this happened with quite a number, where the parents went to America and the boys joined them either on the journey or traveled from London to America afterwards. Because this was before America got into the war. So it was quite, although it was somewhat dangerous, one could still travel from England to the United States by ship, provided they weren't sunk by a U-boat. And one of the boys, his name was Steinberg, Hans Steinberg, who also lived in our street in Zülz. We shared a bed, and his parents must have gone to America early in 1940, and he joined them. He went by train to Southampton or wherever, and he joined them on the boat and went to America. I saw him again 60 years later in America. So that was...
So let's go back to that moment when you left Cologne. You already mentioned we can see Erich Klibansky in this photograph.
Yes, that is Klibansky.
What memories do you have of him? Did you meet him in your school days? What kind of...
We didn't. We were, for what I have heard since, he was a very nice, kind man. But from a schoolboy, from the young schoolboy point of view, he was a very tall and very strict and very... We were quite frightened of him. But according to people who knew him, he was a very kind man. So but I didn't really know him, because he did not accompany us to England. We had a young rabbi from Bonn, Dr. Seligsohn. He was our guardian. He managed the hostel we live in. So, but as it happened, strangely enough, Klibansky, his wife and children, were on the same train as my parents when they were deported from Cologne to the east. And this I didn't discover. It took 50 or 60 years before we actually knew what had happened.
It's a long time, yeah. So there's another photograph
Yes.
of some of the boys who went with you. You're not on that photo, in that photograph.
I'm not on there. But 3 of the boys, in fact, now that I'm looking at it, 4 of us, 4 boys there, even 5, 2, 4, 5. Yes, they were here in England with me. We were together in the hostel in London. I'm afraid one of them might still be alive, I don't know, but all the others have died in the meantime.
Yeah, not that many around anymore.
No, there are not many. There are not many left.
Well, you already said that you didn't find it that traumatic at the time to leave Cologne, that it wasn't as shocking for you as one might imagine.
We were quite, as you can see by the look on the boys' faces, we were looking forward to our trip to England. No question about it. It was going to be an exciting adventure, because it was only going to be for a short while anyway. We knew that. That's what we thought anyway. Klibansky was actually trying to transfer his whole school to England, because he ran out of time. But we were quite happy, ready to go, and looking forward to it.
So can you remember the previous weeks, the preparations? Have you got an idea how it must have felt like for your parents? Did they ever say anything to you? You got any recollections of these?
Well, I think all parents, including myself, we've always tried to protect our children. So, in fact, as children, as you can see, the boys there, we lived quite a carefree life in Cologne. We went to school. Of course, we went to the Jewish school. We went to the Lutzowstraße, which was the primary school, the elementary school. And then we went to the Jawne afterwards, which was our grammar school, our high school. So we not, we didn't have any problems. We weren't worried or afraid or anything. I mean, I was a member. There were 2 sports clubs, Jewish sports club. One was the ITV, which was the Israelitische Turnverein, and the other one was the Hakoah, which was part of the Maccabi, the Zionist organization. And we used to have a running track in Dechstein. And these running tracks, these sports grounds are still there. Because when I met the mayor, I forget his name, of Cologne, he still goes and trains in, I don't know whether it's the same one, but in Dechstein, there are still sports grounds where he's practicing and running and jumping and what have you, as I did when I was a young boy. So and I had a bicycle, so I was quite a free spirit. I traveled all over the town. We had family everywhere. In the center, my uncle was a dentist. The other uncle was a butcher. My grandmother lived in Pol across the river. So it was a town where, yes, we had a big family, and I had a carefree life. I was a happy young boy.
Mm-hmm. So let's go to the UK now. There's a picture of you and your fellow students from the hostel where you stayed.
Yes. Oh, that was one of our.
London.
That's one of our outings when we were in the hostel. Some of these boys are the boys of my class. Others are younger ones, the small ones. One was in the Jawne. They weren't all in the Jawne, because this must have been taken. Some of these children had come from Poland. When the Polish children or Polish people of Polish origin had been deported back to Poland, the children as well, of course, and some of these children had come and joined us in the hostel.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
all
there were
of
some
these
Kindertransports organized from the Polish
yes.
border as well. Yes.
So all of these were in the hostel, or we had another house in London before the war. This must have been I don't know, February, March, somewhere of 1939.
Yeah, and I think that gentleman on the left, that was the rabbi accompanying, who had
Yes,
accompanied
that
you.
was Dr. Seligson.
Yes.
At the back with his glasses, the tall one.
Mm-hmm.
But
how do you
I would say I could put a name to most of these children.
Which is good after all those years. So how do you remember life at the hostel?
Sorry?
How do you remember life at the hostel? What was the atmosphere like?
Oh, we were the only thing that we didn't like or had never been used to. This was an old English house with large rooms, and the bedrooms we had to share with 4 or 5 other boys. We all came from fairly well-to-do homes, and very few of us had any siblings. So obviously I had my own room at home, and most of us had their own room, and suddenly we were in a room with 4 or 5 others. We had to share cupboard space and everything else, which was it was something new. But in the hostel we had a routine. There were a lot of boys, and we had to get up at a certain time, and we had to go to bed at a certain time, and the lights were switched off at a certain time. We all had breakfast together. We all had our meals together. But yes, we went to, eventually, after we had learned English, we went to school, to local primary school. That is one of my main problems. Most of our boys, in fact, we didn't have our education finished in Cologne. We had one more year of schooling in England, in very elementary schools. And of course, that's one of the big problems. All except for 2 of our boys who were lucky enough to be with people who were able to get them into a decent school. who felt that these children should have a decent education. But all the rest of us, when we were 15, I was told, you're 15, your education is finished, and if you want to eat, you have to work. There was no question, would you like to do this or that or something else? We had come from an environment of comfort. We had central heating. We had comfortable homes. And when we were evacuated, in my case, there were very nice people. I'm surprised. I asked myself, would I take in two strange children, God knows where they've come from, and give them a home, just like that? And English people did. There were hundreds, thousands of children being sent away from London into the country. And they marched us through the town, and they knocked on doors, and they said, here are the evacuees from London. How many will you take? So the people I lived with were elderly people. Their daughter was 30 years old, was still at home. She moved out of her bed and shared her mother's bed. And the two boys got her bed to sleep in. And yes, they were very kind, I must say. Of course, not only did we come from London, they couldn't really understand us, but our English wasn't that good. So when they discovered that we were firstly not English, that we were Jewish, they'd never seen a Jew before, and certainly not a German Jew. Somebody was classified as an enemy. So we were Jews and enemies at the same time. It was difficult for them to accept, and it wasn't so easy for us either. But young children are resilient, and we got used to it, we accepted it, and we lived with them. For instance, one new example, we didn't have a bathroom. The house didn't have a bathroom. It only had one cold water tap in the kitchen. The toilet was at the bottom of the garden. So, yes, it was a very new experience, which was rather difficult. But we accepted it and we lived with it. We weren't on our own. So we grew up. We brought ourselves up by our own bootstraps.
So, but did you, or any of the other boys, as far as you can tell, did you miss your old life, or when the war broke out and it became clear that you would at least not see your family again so soon, and then you lost contact?
Well,
was it something?
It was all a strange situation. Of course, when war broke out, suddenly we were here and they were there. So it's very difficult. In the time we were in the hostel, for instance, once a week, we had to sit down and write home. We weren't exactly unhappy in the hostel. We were having quite a good time. We were shown London, and we went to school, and we played table tennis, and we played football and everything else. But our parents, they must have been very, very hard for them. Their most precious possession wasn't with them anymore. Life was difficult in any case for them at that time. And suddenly their boy or their children were away, and they had no idea what was happening to them. I used to get letters from parents What are you doing? Tell us exactly what you're doing. Have you got, do your clothes still fit you? Are you warm enough? Do you get enough to eat? All the things that parents would want to know. And we were quite happy. As you can see, there's a bunch of boys. They were all, yes, most of us are still wearing shorts. Whereas in England, boys of that age were already wearing long trousers. So whenever we went anywhere, people sort of looked at these big boys, large, tall children wearing shorts. But so Coleman on the very left is wearing knickerbockers. People didn't wear knickerbockers in this country. So it was a bit strange for them and for us.
But yeah, there's another photograph from England showing you with your friends. This one here.
Oh yes, yes, this was already in Bedford when we were evacuated. Sad to say that the other three are not with us anymore. But yes, obviously we were playing football. Presumably we were in two teams. Some had wearing white shorts, others were wearing black shorts. But it was Julius Weil on the right and Coleman the second next to him. And on the left was a boy called Rolf Weinberg. Yes, we'd been at school together, and we were, as you can see, we were still together at that time. Although in Bedford, we all lived somewhere else. Rolf was already, the shirt he's wearing was a rugby shirt, so that he was already at his good school, whereas the three of others were still, but we were still together. We were still playing football together.
And did you keep up the friendships in your later life as well? Did you manage to stay in touch?
The two on the right, the one on the very right, Julius Weil, came to my 90th birthday. Coleman, I used to see from time to time. He didn't live far away from here. In fact, the two of us went to Julius's 90th birthday. And my son was not very pleased with me. I drove from London to Cardiff with Coleman, the two of us. And Michael was quite disgusted that I should drive all that way. But there we are.
That's a long way.
That's another story.
Okay, so and then there's the last photograph. Well, which shows your family.
Yes. That was my son. I always said to him, he was such a lovely little boy. And my wife, of course. This was actually taken in Accra. He was born in London, and at the time I was working in Africa, and we had just come back from London. He was, 3-4 months old, probably, yes, something like that, 4 or 5 months old, in Accra, on the equator in Accra. It was the Gold Coast. No, it was Ghana already. It was after independence. When we went out, we went to the Gold Coast, to the British colony. Yes, you haven't changed a bit.
It would still have been the Gold Coast. The independence came later.
Independence was in 19...
what?
When was it? Forget already. 55, I think. 55, 56. We went out in 55, yes. That's the end of 55 was. it became Ghana. But we went to the colony.
Yeah, but so yeah, I think that's a very nice introduction of your son Michael as well, whom I would now like to introduce to the panel as well. So Kurt, thank you very, very much for sharing your story and telling us all about these photographs and giving us insights into what you lived through and what you experienced. And well, I would like to well, as I said, introduce your son Michael Marx to the panel as well, and stop the screen share to have a full picture. So yeah, Michael, we heard quite a lot about your father's story now. When did you learn about your parents' history? Was it something that was around from a very early age onwards, or was it something you only learned about later in your life?
There was I'd sort of preface this by saying that as far as I know, there are two kinds of Holocaust survivor. They're the ones who will talk about nothing else, and they're the second sort who won't talk about it at all. And my late mother was in the latter category. And as my father has said, that for whatever reason, that parents thought they were protecting their children from gaining knowledge or understanding of what their parents had gone through. And it was we've discovered that with many second and third generationers, it left people like me in a slightly difficult position, because for whatever reason, and there were things you could point to, people like me never felt that we fitted in to the society we were living in. And it was an instinct, it was an attitude. I went to what was deemed then to be a good English fee-paying school. And quite a lot of other Jewish boys went to that school, but I didn't feel that I had anything in common with them either, because their families had been in the UK for 3-4 generations, and they were settled, and they did not see the world in the same way. And for me, it was kind of like having a sense that I was not the same as them, but I didn't really quite know why. And there were experiences that I could point to. There was a television series. It was called The World at War. And it was a long series of documentaries about the Second World War. And it was shown in weekly episodes. And one of my deepest memories of what my mother must have gone through was being made to sit in front of that program with the curtains shut and the television on, and you could see the tears streaming down her face. And this, that there were, there were certain words and signals that you could that we were given, but there was never any great explanation. So you knew you were different, you didn't really know why. And it was only much later, for the first time we really got in touch with, certainly my father's experience was in the early 1990s, when we went with him to a reunion of the Jawne. and suddenly sort of things started to fall into place. And I'll embarrass you a little bit, but each of the kinder who attended at a large meal, they were asked to stand up and say a few words about their experience. And I remember, you know, some of them, they stood up, they said, I am whatever, and my parents lived there, and I did this and I did that. My father couldn't, because it all caught up with him. Whereas before, you know, he had, again, this is the thing, you protect somebody from it, but suddenly when you're put in a situation like that, if you like, all the mask slips off, and you suddenly realize what a traumatic thing it was for him, no matter what he says now, because I've seen it. But the if you like, the flow of information really only really opened up after my mother died. Because I think that because he was supporting her and she couldn't talk about it, she just couldn't talk about it. And suddenly I think that with that when that was taken away, suddenly you were a man on a mission. And particularly when you started to find out what happened to your parents. And then, you know, this man who had never really shared his early experiences, for whatever reason, whether it was in solidarity or whether it was because people didn't, or for whatever other reason, suddenly, you know, the gates opened and we started to find out things. And gradually, you know, that all of his various experiences, and particularly when it struck up this relationship with Larissa, where this sort of almost a mission to bring the notion of what happened and the whole thing about Mali Trustenets, which had been almost an undiscovered secret, something that had been suppressed by first the Soviet government and then by the Belarus government. Suddenly that started to come out. And that's the point where I started to learn a lot more about both of their experiences. So, you know, really, it's taken me here I am. I mean, that my father, of course, is a young 98. I'm an old 64. And it's taken me this long to get a real sense of not only what happened to my parents, but what it actually meant to me. Because somehow, yes, they went through the most unbelievable hell. They put a very brave face on it. You know, it's sort of a combination of sort of German uprightness and a British stiff upper lip, and that makes people very, very reluctant to talk about their feelings or even about their experiences. But you know, as you gradually come from point of being just a bit uneasy about where you come from, how you fit in or don't fit in, why you feel as you feel about what is happening in the world, and why that is different to most other people who you encounter. And you know, this is not to attribute any blame at all, because people would always do what they think was right at the time. But for me, being effectively kept in the dark for many years was something that had a big impact later. And we decided with our children, there was a course at the Wiener Library which was intended to take in the children, not the second generation's children. So this was a third generation thing. And my daughter, at the time, this was a one-off opportunity. She was 12, and my wife and I discussed it and thought, is she too young for this? And I thought about my own childhood, and I thought, no, this is the world is not a kind place, and being kept in the dark or being kept ignorant of where you've come from is, on balance, a fairly bad thing. And Jawne, she was the youngest on the course, and she came across people in their late teens, in their mid-20s, all of whom had had a similar experience, but their parents or grandparents had gone out of their way to hide from them. In some cases, that they had that they were in some way Jewish at all, or that they had come from another country. And Jawne was shocked about that, because we hadn't kept it from her, but she couldn't believe that other people had not had that experience. So I've talked a lot. I'm sure that it's caused some unhappiness, but that's been the way it's been for me.
Well, thank you for sharing that. So yeah, Kurt, what do you think? How has your background, your experiences, how has it influenced your family life and the way you raised your son? I mean, I'm sure you made some decisions what to say and what to not to mention in the to him as a child, to protect him.
Well, I don't think it's never a conscious decision not to tell him. It was my wife was a forward-looking person. She didn't look backwards. Her attitude was, what has been is better forgotten, not talked about. So she didn't want to talk about it. She didn't. Everybody deals with the situation as best as they can to cope with it. As Michael said, some people don't do anything but talk about it, and others don't talk about it at all. And it's still happening today. It's nothing unusual. I mean, I belong to an organization here in London called the Holocaust Survivors Group. And there are all kinds of people there who've been through the war, who've been in the concentration camps. And there's the same story one hears all the time. For 50 years, they did not talk about it. It was not it was something that has happened, a very traumatic experience that you wouldn't wish on anybody. And why talk about it? Why dwell on it? In later years, people have asked the question, and I've been asked at various times, tell us what happened to you. Only when I'm asked do I talk about it. I don't volunteer it. It's in the past. One can't, well, I certainly don't dwell on it. I've talked to children in Germany. I've talked to children here in England. I've even talked to children in Belarus, but only because when I'm asked, I do it. I don't look for it.
Well, thank you very much for doing it today, and thank you both very much for giving us these very personal insights and these very personal perspectives on your history. And I think what becomes quite clear is how big the impact is, still is, on the second and the third generation, and how much it affects people up until today. So I think we now the well, our third discussant finally she managed to get on the panel. So a very warm welcome to you, Deborah Kestenberg, as well. Well, we already presented a bit of your mother's story. I showed the clippings from the interview. But if you like, I mean, I of course I couldn't go into as much detail as you can. So if you like, you could probably give us a bit more context about your mother's story and about the research you did on her history now.
Okay, I'd be happy to do that. I'm going to do a screen share and do a presentation. I'm so sorry to have missed your presentation, Kurt. I would have liked to have seen it, but I'll watch it on video. And
who are you? I'm sorry, I didn't get
Deborah
that.
Kestenberg.
That's Eva Meyer's daughter.
Oh, I see. Now,
Yes.
I want to ask you one question. Did your grandparents go to America?
No.
No. Then you're the wrong Meyer.
Yeah, I think there were lots of Myers.
There must have been two girls at the hostel at the time with the same name.
Which hostel?
In the Wilson.
Oh yes, my mother was there.
In Wilson Lane in London, 243.
Yes, my
Wilson
mother
Lane.
was there.
Yes,
and
I
her
know
brother was also there periodically.
Yes, yes, I know she was there. Well, it was our parallel hostel. We used to see the girls, I think once a week when we went to synagogue on a Shabbat.
Oh, okay.
Otherwise,
okay, so, that's interesting. Anyway, so yes, I'm so sorry that the time got messed up, but thank you for this opportunity to continue with my mother's story as it relates to Kindertransport. And really, it's a story like so many others. By way of background, her parents, Johanna and Gustav, had a large extended family and were assimilated, non-observant Jews. My mother, Eva, was born October 18th, 1925, and had two older brothers, Paul and Ernst. Her father was co-owner of Meyer and Moll, a cattle wholesale business with offices in the city center. Both owners came from long-established families in Cologne, Mulheim. In our family, we actually traced back 8 generations, back to 1720 in the vicinity. In 1933, the partners were forced by the National Socialist government to sell their business at a fraction of its value. They tried to fight it through legal means, but to no avail. They traveled to Argentina to investigate setting up business there, but unfortunately rejected that idea. Gustav then turned to researching and investing in the stock market, to much success, as I understand it, and managing his property holdings. I remember my mother telling me that it became difficult for him to collect rents from tenants that were Nazis. In 1937, Paul, the oldest, went to England for university, so he was safe. Johanna had settled him in and then returned to Cologne. During Kristallnacht, the Nazis came at night and hauled Gustav off to Dachau. There he was threatened, wounded with a bayonet to his leg, and apparently only spared because he had fought for Germany during World War I. He was released on the condition that he leave Germany. He returned home a broken man. He'd had a nervous breakdown, is what my uncle had told me. January 1939, Eva, followed by Ernst in May, escaped to England on the Kindertransport. Johanna and Gustav finally left Germany in September 1939, and they were on the very last train for refugees to Holland before the border was closed. Johanna wrote, in quotes, "We felt as though we were going through a tunnel as it collapsed behind us." Tragically, they had only about 9 months before the Nazi takeover for a repeat of their German experience. You can only imagine that horror. They lived again under increasing restrictions. Then on November 18th, 1942, they were sent to the transit camp at Westerbork and murdered in Auschwitz, December 7th, 1942. On the lower left, there's a photo of the stumbling stones on the sidewalk outside their Cologne residence at Ehrenfeld 163. Never to be forgotten. Going back to my mother's story, she was tossed out of public school when her teacher unceremoniously sent her home with "Please don't send Eva to school anymore" written on her slate. So she was transferred to the Jewish elementary school, followed by high school. This ultimately saved her life, as headmaster Erich Klibansky enabled her participation in the Kindertransport. My mother sailed with her classmates on the RMS Aquitania, pictured here, and according to her exemption from internment card, arrived in England January 18th, 1939. She lived at the hostel, which we just mentioned, at 243 Willesden Lane, and was registered at a local school. She had been sponsored by the Refugee Children's Movement in Cricklewood, formed under the leadership of Rabbi Rabinovitz. This Orthodox synagogue provided the necessary guarantees for the children's care. The group photo is of my mom's Kindertransport class. I actually found this on the internet, so it's not a personal item. And it has the hostel mate and Mrs. Cohen circled in the highest one. And on the lower right, a little older and with fancy hairstyles, is her lifelong friend and fellow Kindertransport classmate, Susie Spire Holstein. In both photos, my mom is on the right and Susie's on the left. We have a copy of 1939 correspondence in which Johanna thanks Rabbi Rabinovich, and she says, and I'm going to quote from the letter, "You will understand that we, my husband and I, don't care about ourselves as long as we know that there is an outlook, no matter how small, into a brighter future for our little ones. Of course, it's hard to write off your life at 40, but in a world where countries refuse you admission, we will gladly bear that disappointment after a decent and honest life, if at least we know that the children are offered a chance." And then she worked feverishly to get Ernst onto the Kindertransport because there were difficulties because of the substantial amount of money, because he had already turned 16. And once she'd succeeded at that, she wrote, "Now I feel free at last and happy." This is my uncle Ernst's depiction of his mother watching as the train departs with her child aboard, heading to an unknown future in England. He was 16. In hindsight, he titled it "The Last Goodbye." In the body language, to me, he depicts the hope and sadness mixed with relief. The original is at Yad Vashem, Israel's memorial to Holocaust victims. The family circulated letters, some of which we have. They generally relay funny stories and make light of their situations. It's clear that neither wants to worry the other. They tell of daily activities, escapades of the cats, constantly seeing friends and relatives off, and also of their efforts to immigrate. They had pajamas made for the children and bought them fancy bicycles. Johanna visits the school for updates several times a week. They urge their children to be cooperative, helpful, to thank people. They advise on education and apprenticeships and stress the need to learn English and build support networks. They tell of finally obtaining and forwarding identity papers so their children would not be stateless. In the letters from August 1941, the children are continually worried when they don't hear from the parents. Johanna and Gustav's final letter addressed to my mother was dated October 18th, 1942, which was her birthday. Each wrote exactly one page in beautiful penmanship. In hindsight, it's clear they were saying goodbye. For instance, in the midst of all sorts of other chatter in the letter, they write, "To all of you, the best for the future." Another quote, "Give my birthday wishes to the boys somewhat early. I'm thinking about it now because we're drinking coffee to your health." And they were deported exactly 1 month later. The children received a few highly censored Red Cross letters, which were limited to 25 words. The last one was from their grandmother, in which she wrote, in which she said, "We too are going traveling," which was a euphemism for being deported. She was murdered 6 months after her daughter. After that, there was silence. That was May 1943. Paul writes to his siblings on June 28, 1943, with the bad news that their parents had been sent to Westerbork, which he called a pre-work camp. June 10th, 1945, the children received confirmation of their deportations from a Mrs. van Alst, a neighbor in Zaltbommel, Holland. She had promised she would do so. Official documentation of their deportations was received in October 1959 from the mayor of Zaltbommel and also via a legal letter. I've documented 47 family members on my mother's side that were murdered. In December 2007, I asked my mother to describe her experience, and this is what she said. "I remember the Nazis marching and singing not nice things about us on our street, so I was no longer able to go outside. My old friends from public school could no longer associate with me because it wasn't safe for them. Everyone knew things were not right. Mine was the first class to go on the Kindertransport. I was with Susie, who was in my class and whose uncle was my father's business partner. The train traveled to the crossing via Holland. We were nervous at the border crossings. It was a rough ride across the channel to England. I didn't get seasick, but many did. A young English teacher accompanied us. I was placed for about 6 weeks with a cleaning lady and her husband until the hostel at 243 Willesden Lane was ready. At the hostel, I remember Mrs. Cohen, the matron, as a very proper German lady from Berlin, and her son Hans, who was very handsome, blind, and played the piano. I only found out later that he lost his sight as a result of being beaten by a mob at school after Kristallnacht. Susie and I were in a room with 3 beds and attended the local school. We went to synagogue on Saturdays and said the Baruch before eating. This was my first introduction to this practice. We went to a Zionist summer camp and played parlor games. I remember Dr. Klibansky visiting to report back to our parents. Susie and I were there for about 9 months until being evacuated to the public school, by the public school to Northampton. Our English teacher, Mr. Clitheroe, came with us and found homes for us. Susie and I were initially lodged with the Ashby family, who had 5 children of their own and lived in public housing. I worked in a clothing factory undoing stitching. The people were very kind to us as young children. Some of this, I think, is a little bit repeated from the video, but she said I had sore throats and was treated by Dr. Noel Stone, who loved to practice his German. We needed a new temporary home, so Mr. Clitheroe asked Dr. Stone if he and his wife would take us. He agreed, but a new place was never found, and they basically just got used to us being there. So Susie and I were with them for about 8 years. We always paid for our keep, at first supplemented by the Children's Refugee Committee. They were nice to us, and we remain in touch with their niece. While in Northampton, I worked as a dental receptionist, then a dental technician for Dr. Andrews, a friend of Dr. Stone's. I was temporarily replacing the man sent off to war. Because I was under 16, unlike my brothers, I was not interned as an enemy alien, but I had to report to the police whenever I traveled between cities. For instance, when I visited my brother Paul in London. When the war ended, I had to find other work, so went to London for a few months where Paul was living. Then I went on to Canada to join my middle brother, Ernst, and to seek better opportunities. I think my easygoing nature helped me to cope with being sent away to England at age 13, never to see my parents again. I adjust to things as they are. In Toronto, Canada, my mom married Aaron Kestenberg in 1952 and had 3 children. She worked as a nursery school teacher for 53 years, retiring at age 76. She recently just passed away December 28th, 2023 at the age of 98. And that's my my story. Thank you very much for listening and the opportunity to present.
Thank you, Deborah. So, I mean, we've been in touch for a couple of years now. You contacted us in the course of your family research, which I think you started during the COVID pandemic. Can you tell us a little bit about what made you start and what importance it had for you digging into your family history?
Well, I'll just go back just briefly to the letters. We had a stack of letters, some of which were kept, and they were never touched. And I just became curious about it, and it became a good project for my mother and I to work on. So we started that, probably 20 years ago. And with her it was very hard work for her because she really has forgotten a lot of her German. So we plowed through that. And then when the epidemic hit, my mother became curious about her father's family, of which we knew nothing. And she and her brothers had no memory of associating with family members except maybe one cousin. And so that's what started me on the road to doing the research. And it was absolutely fascinating. And you were so helpful in terms of the information you were able to provide me with.
Okay, thank you. So I would now like to open the panel for discussions from the audience, if there are any. So if you would like to ask questions or leave remarks, you can either do it in the chat or you can just unmute yourself and ask in person. So probably if you could end the screen share.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to do that.
And maybe I can do it for you. I'll just
stop share. Okay, there we are.
Okay, great. So that we can see if people raise their hands.
Yeah.
So yes, are there any questions, any remarks from the audience? Nothing. I mean, I think it's been quite a lot of information and quite a lot of things to digest.
Can I just ask Kurt, you sort of had a sort of flashback to a Prawa. Did you know my uncle Siegbert Prawa? Does that ring a bell?
Siegfried?
Siegbert, no, that's for Kurt.
Siegbert.
Yeah.
Oh, for Kurt, okay.
Siegbert Prawa.
Yes.
Yes, I was going to ask, are you related to
Thank
Siegbert?
you, John. Yeah. John?
Hello.
Yes.
Well, he was my uncle, and I can see Danny is his daughter, and John is his son.
Hello. Yes. Yes.
Hello.
I feel we're here slightly on false pretenses on the Kindertransport because Siegbert was considered such a disruptive influence that he was excluded by the Jawne from joining the Kindertransport, and his family made their own way to Britain together as a family, rather than because the opportunity was denied him by the by the Jawne. So we're in a slightly different position. However, he always talked about how lucky he was to have got to England, and how grateful he was, and how everything that happened to him after 1939 when he got here was a bonus in his life.
So Siegbert Prawa was your uncle?
No, my father.
Your father?
Yeah, Danny, who's here, is Danny Chachkas, and I are Siegbert's children, and Ava Wood is the daughter of Ruth Prava, who was Ruth Prava Jabala, who was Siegbert sister.
Because I remember Siegbert Prava was very clever.
He was.
Yeah,
Yes, he was.
He
Is
stayed,
that, is that right?
Yes.
he stayed clever and he stayed naughty.
No, yes, I don't know. I've lost you all. My pic. I don't see anybody at the moment.
Oh.
Can you hear us all right?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah.
I don't know what.
I'd like to say something a little bit about the Jawne school that he told us. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. My father said that obviously he was exactly the same age as you, born in 1925,
Yes.
in the same class. And
Yes.
he told us that for the few years before the war, more and more Jewish professionals were coming into the school because they had lost their jobs. And he told us very clearly that he remembers some of them, especially there was Ludwig Meitner, who was the artist. But he said very clearly,
yes, Meitner, yes, I
Meitner.
remember. I
Yes.
remember Meitner. Yes.
I have a lovely picture of my father from that Meitner did, and my father also drew quite well. Anyway, one of the things he said was that all these professionals that came to the school, they knew a lot about their subject and they knew nothing about teaching. And he said that the class was chaos, and he added to the chaos. And one of his favorite things was to put a rotten potato in a teacher's pocket.
Did he? I don't remember. I only remember that one of our teachers, and I can't remember his name, when he was very short-sighted, and when to read, he had to take his glasses off, so he put them on the top of his head, and then he couldn't find his glasses, and we spent half the lesson looking for his glasses, which were sitting on top of on his forehead. So you're quite right. If they couldn't keep discipline, I don't know whether the teachers had a hard time, but we had quite a good time.
Yes. Do you remember anything more about our father, Siegbert Prava?
I only remember that he was a very clever fellow. He was one of the cleverest boys in the class.
Mm.
He was very bright.
Yeah.
But I don't.
Okay.
Did he come to England?
He did, with his family.
Where did he go? Where was he? Was he in London?
No.
He wasn't.
First, yeah.
He wasn't in the hostel.
No, he wasn't never in the hostel. He was with his family and privately fostered. Privately fostered, and then he was like you, evacuated from Coventry, where he is privately fostered.
I see.
Yeah, and then he went to a little village in Warwickshire, and he went to a fantastic family who had a fish and chip shop, and they loved him dearly, and they were all in touch until the end of all their days.
Really?
Mm.
Yes, it's very interesting because we were from the hostel, we were evacuated to Bedford. So I know he wasn't with us in Bedford.
That's right. Yeah.
And yes, but I do remember him at school being one of the bright ones. He was a very clever man.
He did go on to be professor at Oxford.
What did he do in the end?
He did go on to be professor of German literature in Oxford.
He was in Oxford.
Yeah, the professor of German.
That's right. Yes, right. In fact, now that you mention it, his wife had died around the same time as my wife.
Oh, yeah.
And I somehow never got in touch with him. I felt somehow intimidated by his cleverness and I never got in touch with him. I'm sorry I didn't.
Yes, it would have been nice. It is a pity. No need to have been intimidated.
Yes, yes, that's quite right. He was in Oxford. I
remember that.
In fact, I don't know, well, you wouldn't remember, but my uncle was a butcher in Cologne, Max Marx. And my aunt remembers the family well because I mentioned it to her and she mentioned all sorts of things. She was in New York and she knew the whole Jewish community and she knew them intimately and she knew the Prava family.
That's great. Thank you.
Well, if you like, I mean, we have all your contact details. So if you're interested, if you haven't been in touch so far and you would like to keep in touch, we'd be happy to put you in contact if you like. I mean, we could just, if you're all fine with it, we could exchange your contact details and then
that's good with me. Thank you.
Yeah, we could you can just stay in touch if you like. So Terry, you're raising your hand, aren't you?
I am.
Okay, so.
And thank goodness Zoom isn't sending up balloons or something, which they often do when you move your hands around. Kurt, my mother was also in the class, was born in 1925 and was in just the last semester because she was.
What was her name?
Her name was Ingelora Zilberbach.
No, I don't remember the name.
She wasn't on the Kindertransport, but she was at the Jawne for the last semester of that year after being expelled from Königin Luisa Schule.
Right. No, I don't remember that name.
All right. The other question that I had was whether you have gotten together since you've, in later years with other people from the Kindertransport, whether you were in the same hostel or not.
Well, we had several of the boys from the Jawne. We were here in London and we were in touch with each other. So one or two in America. There was one, Hans Rothschild. He was in Miami. His father was a doctor in Cologne. There was another one. There were several that we did meet occasionally from time to time. There was Ernst Kohlmann, who lived in London. There was Julius Wahl, who lived in Cardiff. And there was a boy called Hans Walter, who was also in London. But I'm afraid they've all gone. I'm sort of the last one who's still hanging on.
Yeah. Well, I asked you a larger question, not just students that you'd known from the Jawne or from the Kindertransport, because I have a cousin, Vernon Katz, who was on a Kindertransport from.
What's his name?
Vernon Katz.
Not Paul Katz.
No. Anyway, I just wondered if there were still gatherings of people from the Kindertransport across the country who stayed in England.
Well, sort of. The AJR, Association of Jewish Refugees here, we have a Kindertransport group, and we do meet from time to time, not regularly. In fact, one of our patrons was Prince Charles, now our king. So he used to he used to come and attend our meetings from time to time, or we were invited to St. James's Palace from time to time. So it's still, well, gradually there's not many Kinder left. There was a concert last week or the week before, and was a sellout, were hundreds of people there. And they asked the Kinder to get up. There were only 5 of us there. So that's how it is. We're not, most of them are gone.
Right. I know. My cousin is about to turn 97.
Yeah.
But the Zilberbachs were also butchers in Köln.
Yes.
And actually, we've discovered that we have a connection 2 generations ago with the Prover family.
The Prover.
So yes, so I think there's you know, as you said, Max knew everyone. I'm
Yes.
quite sure if he were around that he would be telling stories about my great grandfather and about the Provers family of that generation, which would be wonderful for all of us to share.
Well, I look, at 13, you don't know many people, except the boys you go to school with.
Of course, of course.
But
So,
the interesting thing is that we were at the German embassy only a couple of weeks ago, and this was to mark the 85th anniversary of the Kindertransport, and there was a visiting group from the United States, and it just so happened that 2 of the members of that delegation who did not know each other, their parents or grandparents had been in the Kilburn hostel with my father. So it's one of these things you don't realize how small the world is. And there are these links, and they occasionally happen.
Yeah, that's something that I'm discovering. I live in the US, but I'm in Germany now rather often, including right now. And we keep finding more and more connections. It's inevitable.
Yes. And of course the other thing that's happening is that there was probably an interregnum of 30-40 years where, you know, this whole issue of people not talking about it. So people were not necessarily in possession of all the information that's available now, and you know that we've discovered, you know, literally in the last 2 or 3 months, through various online sources, all sorts of information about the family and the generation before and the generation before, and things that, should we say, that people who are, if you like, who are concerned about their reputations, would not necessarily have shared. You know, that it turns out, for instance, that there is a Stolperstein that has been installed in memory of my late mother's late father. But it could not have been installed by any member of my mother's family, because, you know, that it's clear that this was done at a different location, and that there was more than one person involved with the Stolpersteine that were laid, and at least one of those people we didn't know anything about previously. And it's all of this stuff is sort of coming to light, unfortunately, as the last people who actually remember it are no longer with us. But you know that these connections will keep being made.
Yeah.
And you know, in all probability, we'll discover that we will have people that we knew in common, you know, before very much more time has passed, because, you know, people are gradually feeling able to give up that information to, whether it's the Yad Vashem or whether it's the Cologne archive or whatever.
Right, but as your father has pointed out, most of them are gone. You
Yes,
know, my family
absolutely.
is long gone. There's so many more questions that I have
That's
now
right,
that
but
I have no one to ask.
but you know, but there's also documentation. You know, that when caches of letters come into people's possession. I mean, my father, you were approached, weren't you? What was the nice lady who brought you this whole case full of letters?
I'm sorry?
You remember that all the letters from somebody's father or father-in-law that
Oh,
were brought
yes,
to
yes,
you?
yes, yes, yes. There was a family called Penas in Cologne, and he was in the Jawne with us, and he was here in London, and he wrote to his father, as we all did every week. We had to write, and for some reason or other, his parents left the letters that they had received from him with somebody in Cologne, and that must be the only letters available where you see both sides of the correspondence.
Wow.
The father to the son and the son to the father. And she had them all translated. She is the daughter-in-law of the father-in-law whom she never knew. He died before she married his son.
Oh my God.
And it may be public.
I'm sorry, Benny. This is
It's very fine.
okay, but yeah, okay. Yeah, yeah.
Danny, you're not on mute.
Oh, sorry.
I didn't get that, but there we are.
But I think the point is that, you know, just as, you know, there are more and more archaeological finds that are linked, for instance, linking thousands of years of history in Israel, for instance, and they keep getting discovered, and these documents will also keep getting discovered, because there's no way of telling where people will have stashed them away. You know, as somebody finds an old suitcase up in an attic, and they find that it's full of correspondence, well, they've got a couple of options. Either they just throw it away, or alternatively, they give it to somebody who might be interested. And that's when we find this stuff out.
As
Not
you
always
say,
not always at the pace we'd like to, but there we go.
there was, I don't know whether any of you know, there was the Korbach family in Cologne. And Mrs. Korbach went to the Lutzowstrasse, which was the Jewish primary school, elementary school. And archives were discovered after the war of all the movement of the people sent to concentration camps from Cologne in great detail. And that was only discovered after the war, you're quite right. And this book was published. And that's when I personally found out what happened to my parents. And Mr. and Mrs. Korbach knew more about the Jewish community in Cologne than anybody else I knew. But unfortunately, they both died rather young, so they're not with us anymore. But also the book is out of print, but it's amazing
but copies of it still remain. I have a copy of it. So do you.
That's right.
You know, and
I managed to get a couple of copies.
Yeah.
And there's a copy. In fact, when I was in Minsk, the local historian has managed to get a copy. And that is the only record they have in Belarus of what happened to these people who were deported to Russia. So that's what happens. In the meantime, it's out of print. The people are dead, but
at some point, there will be a situation where somebody who has an eye for the future will bequeath their collection of these sorts of books to an institution like the Wiener Library or Yad Vashem, and they will end up in time being digitized and available.
That's right.
But as I said, the speed of this, well, it's slow and it's expensive to do it.
Or the Jawne or NS-Doc, I might add.
Yeah, look,
we're very keen for, you know, to gather, digitize and disseminate this information.
Well,
I just want to give a plug for our hosts here because they're quite
it's happening all over the place. I mean, in certain respects, I mean, this is sort of to put things to this is sort of a side issue, but there is a need for it, especially now, because we are getting beyond the point where people who actually experienced it are still there to talk about it. There was a book that was written by an American author called Dara Horn, and you might have come across it. It's called "People Love Dead Jews," and basically her thesis is that as we get beyond the point where people find what happened during the Holocaust distasteful and embarrassing, and they have a sense of conscience about it because they are the generation that actually remember it, or their parents remember it, after they're all gone, then the anti-Semitism that brought on the Nazi period becomes fashionable again. It becomes acceptable. People aren't worried about saying that they hate Jews. We're finding it all over the world at the moment. And this is one of the reasons, I go back to what I said before, that our descendants need to know where they've come from, because if they don't, then they are not equipped to resist what's happening at the moment.
I think that's a very good concluding remark, actually. That kind of sums up what our duty, our work will be in the future, and what there's still to do for us researchers, as well as families, of course, doing their family research. And
for sure.
So, if there are not any other questions or remarks or anything you'd like to leave with us now, I think the discussion has gone on for nearly 2 hours, which I think is a very long time. I'm really grateful for every one of you for joining the discussion, especially to our three guests, of course, for giving us such detailed and such personal insights into their stories, their families. So I think it was a very, very interesting discussion we had, and I'm glad for everyone who contributed to it. I'm very thankful. So yes, if you like to get in touch with other participants, feel free to contact us. I think we have the contact details of most of you. Well, we have them all through your registration. So if you like to keep up the conversation about your family histories, just feel free to let me know, and then I will be happy to put you in touch with each other. And yes, well, once again, a huge thank you, especially to our three guests and to everyone else. And
thank you.
Yes, enjoy the rest of the evening or the day, wherever you are. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Bertie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And hope to see you all again in another occasion, sooner or later. Lovely. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All the best.